How to Talk Like a Leader. Introduction. In a world increasingly driven by communication, the ability to speak like a leader has become one of the most essential skills for personal and professional success. And How to Talk Like a Leader dive deep into the art and science of powerful communication as a cornerstone of effective leadership. The book argues that leadership is not simply about titles, positions, or power. It's about influence, trust, and vision, all of which are conveyed primarily through the way one communicates. Whether you are an executive trying to mobilize a large organization, a mid-level manager looking to motivate a team, or a young professional aiming to build a reputation, this book teaches that your words, tone, body language, and the clarity of your message can either elevate or undermine your impact. It explains that leaders who communicate well can articulate vision clearly, inspire others into action, handle conflict wisely, and earn credibility even in tough moments. The book starts by dismantling the myth that great communicators are simply born with a gift, emphasizing instead that leadership communication is a learned skill, a toolkit of techniques, strategies, and habits that anyone can master with practice and intention. Central to its philosophy is the idea that talking like a leader means thinking like one first, aligning your speech with your values, being intentional about the message you send, and always being mindful of how your words affect the people who hear them. From the boardroom to the hallway, every interaction is an opportunity to build trust or erode it, to motivate or confuse, to influence or alienate, and this book makes it clear that leadership presence begins with language. Unlike generic communication books, How to Talk Like a Leader blends psychological insight with real-world examples to show how words can be used to navigate complex dynamics, build alignment, and manage perception. It introduces the concept of leadership language, a conscious, structured way of speaking that includes confidence without arrogance, clarity without oversimplification, and empathy without weakness. The author identifies common communication traps such as vague language, defensive tones, overuse of jargon, or speaking without listening, and offers practical tools to overcome them. It explains how leaders can develop their executive presence, not through dressing differently or sounding rehearsed, but by learning to think on their feet, respond rather than react, and connect with their audience on both logical and emotional levels. Throughout the book, readers are taught how to tailor their language to different stakeholders, from employees and peers to upper management and clients, while maintaining consistency, authenticity, and clarity. A key focus is on the importance of listening as part of leadership communication. It's not just about what leaders say, but how well they understand others and respond accordingly. The book makes a compelling case that communication is what transforms a vision from a private idea into a shared mission, and what turns authority into influence. Through chapters rich in strategies and examples, it equips readers to handle high-pressure conversations, resolve misunderstandings, speak persuasively in meetings, and communicate with purpose in moments of uncertainty or change. It emphasizes that leadership communication isn't always about being the loudest voice or the most charismatic speaker, but rather about being the clearest, most intentional, and most trustworthy communicator in the room. Readers are encouraged to practice framing messages in ways that align with organizational goals, to use language that inspires collaboration instead of compliance, and to speak in ways that people not only hear but remember. The book also explores how to adjust your leadership language in today's digital world, how to write emails, give feedback over video calls, or lead remote teams with presence and impact. It underscores the importance of consistent messaging and emotional intelligence, showing how leaders can use tone and timing to shape morale, manage conflict, and maintain credibility across platforms. Whether delivering difficult feedback, speaking publicly, leading meetings, or just checking in with a team member, every spoken word has the potential to reflect leadership, or lack thereof, and this book serves as a comprehensive guide to ensuring your words consistently reflect confidence, clarity, and connection. In sum, How to Talk Like a Leader is not merely about improving vocabulary or mastering a list of phrases. It's about changing the way leaders approach conversations altogether. It teaches that effective communication starts with intention, is shaped by structure, and succeeds when it leads to alignment, motivation, and trust. Communication becomes the bridge between strategy and execution, between vision and reality, between a leader and their people. And in a time when authenticity, agility, and clarity are more valued than ever, learning to talk like a leader is not just a soft skill, it's a competitive advantage. By grounding leadership in everyday language choices, the book gives readers a roadmap to becoming not just better communicators, but truly more impactful leaders. Chapter 1: The Power of Leadership Language sets the foundational tone for the entire book by asserting that the essence of leadership is in communication, not merely in what leaders do, but in how they convey purpose, align people, and influence outcomes through language. It argues that words are not just tools for sharing information, they are the vehicles of trust, authority, direction, and emotional connection. The chapter begins by emphasizing that leaders are constantly being evaluated not just by their decisions, but by how clearly and confidently they communicate those decisions to others. Leadership language, therefore, must be intentional, precise, and audience-centered. The chapter dismantles the assumption that leadership communication is about being charismatic or loud, explaining instead that true leadership influence comes from clarity, authenticity, and resonance. Words can inspire action, build culture, de-escalate conflict, or, if misused, create confusion and resistance. The chapter provides examples from workplace environments where poorly chosen language caused misalignment, frustration, or a lack of motivation, contrasting them with leaders who chose their words strategically and created a culture of accountability and engagement. It explains that the tone, structure, and emotional weight of language are as important as the content itself. A message that is technically correct can still fail if delivered without empathy or clarity. Great leaders understand that their language must do more than inform. It must influence thought, shape behavior, and reinforce the organization's values. The chapter dives into how leadership language involves not just giving directions but framing those directions in a way that taps into people's motivations, aligns with larger goals, and reduces ambiguity. It outlines how vague statements such as, "let's do better," or "we need to improve," are far less effective than precise language like, "our goal is to reduce processing time by 20% in the next quarter by streamlining steps X and Y." The chapter also introduces the psychological aspect of language, pointing out that words can affect people's sense of belonging, confidence, and emotional safety. Leaders who master their language can use it to build trust by being consistent, transparent, and respectful in all interactions. Another important idea covered is the concept of linguistic imprinting, the idea that people remember not just what you said but how you made them feel when you said it. A strong leadership message resonates because it connects both intellectually and emotionally with listeners, and this requires language that balances logic and empathy. The chapter encourages leaders to adopt a mindset of conscious communication, understanding their audience's needs, context, and emotional state before crafting a message. It also emphasizes that silence, pauses, and listening are integral to leadership language. Dominating a conversation with words alone does not equal leadership. Leaders who listen attentively can respond more thoughtfully, making their words more powerful when they do speak. It further warns against reactive language, those moments when stress or ego leads to dismissive, defensive, or overly aggressive speech that diminishes a leader's credibility. Instead, it promotes proactive language, language that anticipates questions, acknowledges concerns, and creates a sense of psychological safety. The chapter also explores the role of storytelling in leadership language, explaining that facts alone are rarely memorable, but when embedded in a story, they gain emotional weight and human relevance. Stories can anchor complex ideas, inspire teams, and create a shared sense of purpose. Another theme is consistency. Leaders must align their words with actions and values, because inconsistency erodes credibility quickly. For instance, if a leader talks about collaboration but constantly interrupts or dismisses others' ideas, their language loses integrity. This leads to the concept of linguistic integrity, making sure that what you say, how you say it, and what you do are all in alignment. The chapter also notes that leadership language is not just top-down. Leaders influence through peer interactions, informal conversations, and even written communication like emails and reports. Therefore, every word, spoken or written, contributes to the leader's perceived effectiveness. Leaders who succeed are those who recognize that language is not a filler between actions but a strategic act. It offers a framework for assessing your own communication. Am I clear? Am I credible? Am I connecting? The answers to these questions help leaders build a personal style of communication that is consistent and impactful. Additionally, the chapter explains that leadership language evolves depending on context. Speaking to a team during a crisis requires different tone and framing than motivating a high-performing team toward stretch goals. Adaptability, therefore, is a hallmark of strong leadership communication. A particularly insightful point is that leadership language often sets the emotional tone of the room, whether in meetings, presentations, or one-on-ones. A leader who speaks with calm, constructive energy can diffuse anxiety and build momentum even when dealing with setbacks. Conversely, reactive or confusing language can increase uncertainty and stress, especially in times of change. The chapter also touches on the need for inclusive language, noting that how leaders refer to people, groups, and ideas can either foster a sense of inclusion or reinforce division. Phrases, metaphors, or tones that unconsciously exclude or stereotype can quickly damage trust, especially in diverse environments. Leaders are advised to continually evaluate and refine their language with a lens of respect, empathy, and empowerment. In summary, Chapter 1 serves as a wake-up call to leaders at all levels. The words you use are not neutral. They carry weight, shape perception, and influence outcomes. To talk like a leader means to think like a leader before you speak, to choose your words with awareness, and to recognize that language is one of your most powerful leadership tools. By mastering the nuances of tone, structure, emotional resonance, and strategic clarity, you can lead not just with authority, but with influence that inspires trust and drives action. Chapter 2, Speak with Purpose, delves into the principle that effective leadership communication starts with clear intent. Before a word is spoken, a true leader understands why they are speaking, what they hope to achieve, and how their message will land with the listener. This chapter builds on the foundation set in Chapter 1 by shifting the focus from the power of language to the strategy behind it, arguing that purpose-driven communication is what separates ordinary speakers from influential leaders. It begins by emphasizing that every conversation, whether it's a formal presentation or a quick hallway exchange, should be anchored in a defined objective, such as informing, inspiring, aligning, challenging, or resolving. Speaking without purpose, the chapter warns, leads to rambling, unclear messages that waste time and often cause confusion or disengagement. Purposeful speaking, on the other hand, results in clarity, impact, and alignment between words and outcomes. The chapter underscores that leaders don't talk just to be heard. They talk to move people, drive action, and build understanding. This means that every message should be crafted with the audience in mind. What do they need to know? What do I want them to feel or do afterward? What context are they operating in? Leaders who speak with purpose are not only aware of their own goals but are highly attuned to the emotional and practical needs of their listeners. A major theme in the chapter is intentional framing, learning to set up a conversation or message in a way that directs attention to the most important points and clarifies expectations. For example, rather than launching into a long explanation of quarterly metrics, a leader might begin with, "The purpose of this meeting is to identify what's working, what's not, and what we'll focus on for the next 90 days. That brief framing gives everyone context, prepares them to participate, and signals leadership presence. The chapter also critiques the tendency of many leaders to speak out of habit rather than reflection, defaulting to overused jargon, vague praise, or emotionally flat directives. It challenges readers to move beyond generic language and instead infuse their speech with meaning that connects personally and organizationally. Whether giving feedback, setting a vision, or handling conflict, leaders who speak with purpose make their words matter. This requires preparation, not scripting but thoughtful pre-thinking. The chapter offers a tool called the Leadership Communication Triangle, which consists of 3 guiding questions. What is my goal? Who is my audience? What result do I want from this message? By running every communication through this triangle, leaders ensure that their message is not only clear but strategically aligned. A particularly powerful part of the chapter is its discussion on alignment between purpose and tone. For instance, if a leader's intent is to motivate a team after a tough quarter, but their tone is cold or overly analytical, the message will fall flat. Alternatively, if the purpose is to deliver critical feedback but the tone is overly soft or vague, the message might be misunderstood or dismissed. Speaking with purpose means aligning what you say, how you say it, and why you say it, all in service of the desired outcome. The chapter also highlights the importance of listening as part of purposeful speaking. Leaders who speak with intent know that communication is not one way. They pause to assess reactions, read body language, and adjust their message in real time. This feedback loop ensures that the purpose of the message is being achieved, not just delivered. Another key idea presented is that leadership communication should always link individual actions to broader goals. When a leader explains why something matters, how a small task supports a larger mission, or how a policy change impacts the company's vision, they activate motivation and commitment in others. This kind of purposeful framing transforms instructions into meaning and meaning into momentum. The chapter also explores how to speak with purpose during difficult conversations, such as delivering bad news, making unpopular decisions, or addressing performance issues. It stresses that clarity is not cruelty. Vagueness in these situations often leads to more harm than honest, respectful communication. Leaders are encouraged to prepare these conversations with a focus on both outcome and empathy. What needs to be said, how it can be said with respect, and how to leave the listener feeling supported even if the message is tough. Another section is devoted to consistency, explaining that purposeful communication requires repetition of key messages over time. Leaders should not assume that saying something once is enough. Repeating and reinforcing core messages in different formats and settings helps people retain them and take them seriously. This doesn't mean becoming robotic or redundant, but rather finding authentic ways to revisit important themes, always connecting them back to the why. Purposeful speaking also means being concise, saying more with fewer words. The chapter warns against over-explaining or burying important ideas in unnecessary detail. Instead, it encourages leaders to prioritize what truly matters and deliver that message with clarity and confidence. This kind of speech respects people's time and enhances the authority of the speaker. Toward the end of the chapter, the author reflects on the ripple effect of purposeful communication. When leaders speak with intent, their teams begin to mirror that behavior, leading to more focused meetings, clearer project goals, and a stronger sense of organizational direction. The culture begins to shift from reactive to proactive, from vague to intentional. Speaking with purpose, therefore, is not just a communication tactic, it's a leadership philosophy. It signals that a leader is thoughtful, strategic, and committed to meaningful results. The chapter closes with a practical reminder that speaking with purpose does not require perfection. It requires presence. By pausing, thinking, aligning, and then speaking, leaders can ensure that their communication drives outcomes instead of just filling silence. In today's fast-paced, attention-fractured world, the ability to speak with intention is one of the rarest and most valuable leadership traits. Leaders who master it earn not just attention, but trust, influence, and long-term credibility. Whether addressing a boardroom, coaching a struggling team member, or delivering a vision to a skeptical crowd, purposeful speech cuts through the noise and creates impact. In essence, Chapter 2 reinforces that great leadership communication doesn't happen by accident, it happens by design. And that design starts with knowing exactly why you're speaking and what change you want your words to create. Chapter 3, Crafting the Leadership Voice, focuses on the essential but often overlooked aspect of leadership communication. Not just what you say but how you say it, your voice as a powerful instrument of influence, credibility, and connection. The chapter opens by explaining that while words carry meaning, the voice adds a layer of emotional context that can either enhance or undermine the message. It argues that leadership voice is a blend of tone, pitch, pace, volume, and nonverbal cues, all which shape how listeners perceive a leader's confidence, sincerity, and authority. Unlike some natural-born speakers, many leaders do not automatically have a compelling vocal presence but can learn to develop and refine it with awareness and practice. The chapter stresses that crafting a leadership voice is less about mimicking someone else's style and more about discovering and amplifying your authentic voice, so it aligns with your message and leadership brand. Authenticity is key. Leaders who sound genuine build trust, while those who sound rehearsed or artificial risk losing credibility. The chapter explores the vocal qualities that make a leadership voice compelling, starting with tone, which conveys emotion and attitude beyond the words themselves. A warm, steady tone can calm anxieties and foster openness, while a harsh or monotone voice may create resistance or boredom. Leaders are encouraged to be mindful of the emotional impact of their tone and to practice modulating it to suit different situations, whether rallying a team, delivering tough feedback, or inspiring innovation. Pitch is another critical dimension discussed. The chapter explains how varying pitch, instead of speaking in a flat or overly high voice, makes speech more engaging and signals enthusiasm and confidence. Leaders who learn to use pitch effectively can emphasize key points and keep listeners attentive. Equally important is pacing, the speed at which you speak. Speaking too fast can overwhelm or confuse an audience, while speaking too slowly risks losing interest. The chapter advocates for deliberate pacing, using pauses strategically to allow key ideas to sink in or to build anticipation. Silence becomes a leadership tool, giving space for reflection or emphasizing a critical message. Volume 2 plays a role in leadership voice. While a strong, clear voice projects confidence and commands attention, leaders are cautioned against shouting or speaking too softly, as both extremes can alienate listeners. The chapter offers practical tips for finding an optimal volume that suits the speaker's natural voice and the setting, whether in a small meeting or a large auditorium. Beyond the mechanical aspects of voice, the chapter dives into nonverbal vocal qualities such as breath control and articulation, showing how breath supports voice strength and clarity, and how clear pronunciation ensures messages are understood without distraction. Leaders are urged to practice mindful breathing to maintain calmness and prevent nervousness from impacting their speech. Another important section addresses the alignment of voice with body language, how gestures, facial expressions, and posture reinforce or contradict vocal messages. The chapter explains that incongruence between voice and body can cause confusion or mistrust, while alignment creates a powerful presence that commands respect. The chapter also discusses how different communication contexts require adjustments in vocal style. For example, a coaching conversation with an individual may require a softer, empathetic voice, while a keynote speech might call for more projection and dynamic variation. Leaders who master adapting their voice to context demonstrate emotional intelligence and versatility. Furthermore, the chapter touches on overcoming common vocal challenges that leaders face, such as a tendency to speak in a monotone, trailing off at the end of sentences, or using filler words, like, which weaken the leadership voice. It offers exercises and tips to build vocal confidence, such as recording oneself to gain awareness, practicing diaphragmatic breathing, and rehearsing with intentional pauses. The chapter emphasizes that voice is a habit that can be cultivated with consistent practice and feedback, not an innate gift reserved for a select few. A key insight is that the leadership voice is also a reflection of mindset. Leaders who believe in their message and themselves naturally project a stronger voice. Conversely, doubt or uncertainty often translates into a weak or hesitant voice. Therefore, vocal training goes hand in hand with building self-confidence and clarity of purpose. The chapter also highlights the role of storytelling in crafting a leadership voice. Storytelling demands vocal variety, shifts in tone, pitch, and pace, that bring narratives to life and engage audiences emotionally. Leaders who master this can make abstract ideas tangible and memorable, turning routine updates into compelling conversations. Importantly, the chapter addresses inclusivity and cultural sensitivity in vocal communication, reminding leaders that voice and speech patterns vary widely across cultures and identities. Effective leaders listen and adapt to diverse communication styles, avoiding assumptions and respecting differences in vocal expression. This fosters an environment where everyone feels heard and valued. The chapter concludes by reinforcing that the leadership voice is a tool for connection. It is not about dominance or control but about inviting others into dialogue, creating psychological safety, and inspiring shared commitment. By intentionally crafting their voice, leaders can become more persuasive, approachable, and authentic, ultimately enhancing their influence and effectiveness. The chapter encourages readers to view voice development as a lifelong journey, one that requires curiosity, self-compassion, and continual refinement. By embracing this process, leaders unlock a powerful channel for expressing their vision, values, and empathy in ways that words alone cannot achieve. In summary, crafting the leadership voice shows that leadership presence is as much about how something is said as what is said, and that voice is an essential dimension of leadership communication that can be consciously shaped to strengthen influence, build trust, and inspire action. Chapter 4, Leading in Conversation, explores the crucial skill of navigating everyday interactions with intention and influence, emphasizing that leadership is not confined to grand speeches or formal meetings but thrives in the countless conversations leaders engage in daily. The chapter opens by underscoring that conversations are the primary arena where leadership is enacted, where trust is built, ideas are shaped, conflicts are resolved, and culture is lived. It challenges the misconception that leadership communication is all about monologues or presentations, instead highlighting that two-way dialogue is the heart of effective leadership. The chapter stresses that leading in conversation means being fully present, actively listening, and responding thoughtfully, rather than merely waiting for your turn to speak. It introduces the idea that conversations are dynamic and fluid, requiring leaders to balance confidence with curiosity, direction with openness, and clarity with empathy. This balance enables leaders to guide discussions toward productive outcomes while valuing the input and perspectives of others. The chapter explores the components of effective conversational leadership, starting with preparation, knowing your objectives but remaining flexible to adjust based on the flow of dialogue. It advises leaders to enter conversations with a clear sense of purpose, whether to solve a problem, gather information, provide feedback, or build relationships, while being ready to listen and adapt. Active listening is a major focus, with the chapter detailing how leaders can show genuine engagement through verbal and nonverbal cues, such as nodding, summarizing, and asking open-ended questions that encourage others to share more deeply. By listening attentively, leaders gather insights that inform better decisions and demonstrate respect, which in turn fosters trust and openness. Another key theme is the power of asking questions. The chapter explains that skilled leaders use questions not only to gather facts but to stimulate critical thinking, challenge assumptions, and encourage ownership among team members. Rather than dictating solutions, they create space for collaboration and innovation through thoughtful inquiry. The chapter contrasts leading conversations with dominating them, warning against common pitfalls such as interrupting, talking over others, or steering discussions toward self-serving agendas. Instead, it promotes humility and patience, suggesting that leaders who embrace dialogue as a shared exploration build stronger relationships and more sustainable buy-in. Emotional intelligence is woven throughout the chapter as an essential ingredient for leading in conversation. Leaders who are attuned to emotional undercurrents can sense when tensions arise, recognize unspoken concerns, and respond with empathy and calm. This emotional awareness helps de-escalate conflicts and create a psychologically safe environment where people feel comfortable expressing ideas and dissenting opinions. The chapter also highlights the importance of managing difficult conversations, a frequent challenge for leaders. It offers strategies for staying composed, maintaining respect, and addressing issues directly without blame or defensiveness. Techniques include framing feedback constructively, focusing on behaviors rather than personalities, and setting clear next steps. Leading in conversation also means mastering the art of storytelling, which the chapter identifies as a powerful tool to connect, inspire, and clarify complex ideas. Through stories, leaders humanize abstract concepts, share values, and make messages memorable, transforming ordinary exchanges into meaningful moments. The chapter underscores that timing and pacing in conversation matter. Knowing when to speak, when to listen, and when to pause can greatly influence the flow and effectiveness of dialogue. Silence, in particular, is highlighted as a powerful conversational tool that can encourage reflection and reveal deeper insights. Additionally, the chapter touches on the role of nonverbal communication in conversation, how facial expressions, gestures, eye contact, and posture complement and amplify spoken words. Leaders who are mindful of these signals project confidence, openness, and approachability, inviting others into genuine exchange. The chapter also explores how leaders can navigate power dynamics in conversation, recognizing when to assert authority and when to yield space to others, fostering an inclusive environment where all voices are heard. It discusses the importance of building rapport and trust over time through consistent conversational habits that demonstrate reliability, authenticity, and respect. The chapter acknowledges the challenges of virtual conversations, especially in remote or hybrid work settings, offering guidance on how to maintain engagement, read cues, and create connection through digital mediums. It encourages leaders to be intentional about using video, tone, and check-ins to overcome the barriers of technology and foster presence. Throughout, the chapter reinforces that leading in conversation is a skill that requires self-awareness, empathy, and practice. It is not about controlling dialogue but about facilitating meaningful exchanges that move people toward shared goals. By mastering conversational leadership, leaders can transform routine interactions into opportunities for influence, innovation, and relationship building. The chapter concludes by encouraging readers to reflect on their own conversational habits, inviting them to practice listening more than speaking, asking better questions, managing emotions, and approaching every conversation as a leadership moment. Ultimately, leading in conversation positions everyday dialogue as a powerful leadership lever, reminding us that how leaders engage with others in the moment shapes organizational culture, drives performance, and builds the trust that underpins lasting success. Chapter 5, The Language of Influence, delves deeply into the nuanced and strategic use of language as a critical tool for leaders to shape perceptions, inspire action, and build consensus, highlighting that influence through language is not about manipulation or coercion but about ethically guiding others toward shared goals through clear, compelling, and authentic communication. The chapter begins by asserting that influence is the heart of leadership. Without it, even the most brilliant ideas and bold visions cannot gain traction. It stresses that the words leaders choose can open minds or shut them down, energize teams or create resistance, foster trust or breed skepticism. Therefore, mastering the language of influence is essential for any leader seeking to make a meaningful impact. The chapter outlines how influence operates on both conscious and subconscious levels, noting that beyond logical arguments, language taps into emotions, values, and identity, powerful drivers of human behavior. Leaders who understand this dual dynamic craft messages that appeal not only to reason but also to feelings and shared beliefs, creating resonance that motivates commitment. A key concept introduced is framing, the way information is presented, which can dramatically affect how it is received. The chapter explains that leaders must carefully frame challenges and opportunities to highlight benefits, align with audience values, and reduce perceived risks. For example, framing a change initiative as a chance to innovate and grow is more likely to gain buy-in than presenting it as a mandate to cut costs. Alongside framing, the chapter discusses the use of metaphor and analogy as tools of influence, allowing leaders to translate complex or abstract ideas into relatable, vivid imagery. Metaphors help create mental models that simplify understanding and create emotional connection, making messages stick and inspiring action. The chapter emphasizes the importance of word choice, noting that specific, positive, and active language enhances influence, while vague, negative, or passive words diminish it. Leaders are encouraged to avoid jargon and cliches that can alienate or confuse audiences, instead opting for clear, concise, and powerful terms that paint a compelling picture of the future. Another significant point is the use of storytelling as a vehicle of influence. Stories personalize data and ideas, making them memorable and emotionally engaging. The chapter highlights that stories involving relatable characters, conflicts, and resolutions resonate deeply and encourage listeners to see themselves as part of the narrative, thereby fostering alignment and motivation. Emotional intelligence plays a vital role in the language of influence, as leaders who can read their audience's emotional state and adjust their language accordingly are far more effective. The chapter stresses the importance of empathy in shaping messages that acknowledge concerns, validate feelings, and build psychological safety, which opens the door for honest dialogue and receptiveness. The chapter also covers techniques to build credibility and trust through language, such as demonstrating humility, admitting uncertainty when appropriate, and consistently aligning words with actions. Leaders who speak authentically and transparently strengthen their influence because people sense genuineness and are more willing to follow. Persuasion strategies are discussed as well, including the balance of ethos, credibility, logos, logic, and pathos, emotion. The chapter underscores that the most persuasive leaders integrate all three, crafting messages that are believable, rationally sound, and emotionally compelling. Furthermore, the chapter addresses common barriers to influence, such as defensiveness, cognitive biases, and resistance to change, and offers language strategies to overcome them. For instance, using inclusive language that emphasizes shared goals rather than us versus them mentalities can reduce defensiveness and foster collaboration. The chapter explores the power of questions as influence tools, highlighting how open-ended questions encourage reflection and ownership, shifting people from passive recipients of directives to active participants in problem-solving and decision-making. Additionally, leaders are advised to use affirmations and positive reinforcement to motivate and build confidence, reinforcing desired behaviors and attitudes. The chapter emphasizes the importance of timing and delivery, noting that even the most well-crafted message can lose influence if delivered at the wrong moment or in an inappropriate tone. Leaders must be attuned to context, readiness of their audience, and their own presence to maximize impact. Nonverbal communication is also acknowledged as a critical component of influence, complementing language with gestures, facial expressions, and posture that reinforce credibility and engagement. Throughout, the chapter advocates for ethical influence, leading with integrity and respect rather than manipulation, arguing that sustainable influence is built on trust and mutual benefit. The chapter closes by encouraging leaders to continuously develop their language skills as a core leadership competency, recognizing that the ability to influence through words amplifies every other leadership skill, from vision setting to conflict resolution. In summary, the language of influence reveals that language is the currency of leadership power and that by mastering framing, storytelling, emotional intelligence, and persuasive techniques, leaders can ethically inspire, motivate, and guide their organizations toward meaningful change and success. Chapter 6, Communication in Crisis, addresses one of the most demanding and high-stakes aspects of leadership communication: how to effectively convey messages during times of uncertainty, pressure, and turmoil, when emotions run high, information is scarce, and stakes are elevated. The chapter begins by emphasizing that crises, whether sudden emergencies, reputational threats, operational failures, or complex organizational challenges, put leadership communication under intense scrutiny, making clarity, honesty, and composure paramount. It argues that in such moments, what leaders say and how they say it can profoundly impact outcomes, shaping public perception, team morale, and the organization's ability to respond effectively. The chapter stresses that crisis communication is not just about managing information but about leading people through fear, confusion, and ambiguity by providing steady guidance and fostering trust. Leaders who fail to communicate well during crises risk exacerbating problems, losing credibility, and diminishing stakeholder confidence. The chapter outlines key principles that underpin effective crisis communication, starting with speed and transparency. It explains that withholding information or delaying communication breeds rumors and distrust, while timely, honest updates help maintain credibility and demonstrate accountability. Even when full details are not yet known, leaders are encouraged to acknowledge uncertainty openly while committing to ongoing communication. A major focus is on clarity. Crisis messages must be simple, direct, and free of jargon or ambiguous language. The chapter emphasizes that in high-pressure situations, people crave straightforward facts and clear guidance on what to expect and what actions to take. Avoiding technical language and breaking complex information into digestible pieces increases comprehension and reduces panic. The chapter discusses the emotional dimension of crisis communication, highlighting the need for empathy and compassion. Leaders are advised to recognize and validate the fear, anxiety, and frustration their audiences may feel, showing that they understand the human impact beyond just the facts. This emotional connection fosters psychological safety and encourages cooperation. Another critical point is consistency. Leaders must ensure that messages are aligned across all channels and spokespeople to prevent confusion and mixed signals. The chapter suggests establishing clear communication protocols and roles in advance to streamline messaging and maintain unity. It also explores the importance of two-way communication during crises, encouraging leaders to listen actively to concerns and feedback from employees, customers, and other stakeholders. This dialogue helps leaders adjust strategies, correct misinformation, and demonstrate responsiveness. The chapter provides strategies for managing difficult conversations that arise in crisis contexts, such as delivering bad news, addressing mistakes, or confronting tough questions from media or stakeholders. It advises maintaining composure, using respectful language, and focusing on solutions rather than blame. The chapter also highlights the power of storytelling in crisis communication, not to minimize the severity but to humanize the situation, share lessons learned, and inspire resilience. Leaders who tell honest stories about challenges and recovery can strengthen connection and hope. The chapter delves into the role of nonverbal communication, noting that body language, facial expressions, and tone of voice must convey calm confidence and empathy to reinforce verbal messages. Inconsistent or distracted nonverbal cues can undermine credibility. Additionally, the chapter discusses the challenges of communicating in the digital age, where information spreads rapidly and misinformation can escalate quickly. It underscores the necessity of monitoring social media, responding promptly to rumors, and using digital tools to provide accurate updates. The chapter also examines the psychological impact of crises on both leaders and their teams, reminding leaders to manage their own stress and model calm, focused behavior. Self-care and emotional regulation are presented as vital for sustaining effective communication under pressure. Furthermore, the chapter emphasizes preparation as the foundation of successful crisis communication. Leaders are encouraged to develop crisis communication plans, conduct simulations, and train spokespersons so they can respond swiftly and effectively when real crises occur. The chapter acknowledges that no crisis is the same and that communication must be tailored to the specific context, audience, and severity. Flexibility and adaptability are key. Toward the end, the chapter highlights that ethical considerations must guide crisis communication, advocating for honesty even when delivering difficult truths. Attempts to spin or obscure facts ultimately damage trust. The chapter closes by framing crisis communication as a leadership test and opportunity. Leaders who communicate well in crises not only mitigate damage but also build lasting trust and demonstrate the resilience and integrity that define true leadership. In summary, communication in crisis underscores that effective communication during turbulent times demands speed, clarity, empathy, consistency, and preparation, and that leaders who master these principles can guide their organizations through uncertainty with confidence and compassion, emerging stronger on the other side. Chapter 7, Everyday Leadership Talk, emphasizes that leadership communication isn't confined to formal speeches, presentations, or high-stakes meetings but is most profoundly demonstrated in the everyday conversations, interactions, and informal exchanges that leaders engage in daily. This chapter argues that the small moments, whether a quick hallway chat, a team check-in, or a casual coffee break, offer powerful opportunities to influence, inspire, and build trust, shaping organizational culture and relationships one conversation at a time. The chapter begins by dismantling the myth that leadership communication requires grand oratory, pointing out that authenticity, consistency, and presence in daily talk are what truly cultivate leadership credibility. It asserts that leadership is embedded in the way leaders show up in ordinary moments, how they listen, respond, and connect with others consistently over time. The chapter encourages leaders to view every interaction as a chance to reinforce values, model behaviors, and nurture engagement. A key theme is the power of intentionality in everyday talk. Leaders are urged to bring mindfulness to their communication, recognizing that even brief exchanges carry meaning and impact. Whether it's offering praise, providing constructive feedback, or simply asking how someone is doing, these moments collectively influence motivation, morale, and team cohesion. The chapter explores how leaders can use everyday talk to create psychological safety, the foundation for innovation and risk-taking. By communicating openness, respect, and genuine curiosity in routine interactions, leaders signal that diverse voices are valued and that mistakes are part of learning. The chapter highlights the importance of consistency in tone and message across informal and formal settings, as incongruence can confuse and erode trust. It also discusses the role of listening as an active leadership behavior in everyday talk. Leaders who listen attentively demonstrate care and respect, uncover hidden issues, and build rapport. The chapter provides practical tips on how to listen with presence, avoiding distractions and interruptions, and asking follow-up questions that deepen understanding. Another significant point is the use of language that empowers and motivates. The chapter explains how leaders can use positive, inclusive, and future-focused language to foster a sense of possibility and collective purpose. Simple phrases like, "We can figure this out together," or "I appreciate your effort," reinforce collaboration and commitment. Additionally, the chapter addresses the importance of clarity and simplicity in everyday communication. Leaders who communicate clearly avoid misunderstandings and wasted effort, ensuring everyone is aligned and moving forward effectively. The chapter also touches on the role of storytelling in everyday leadership talk, not just as grand narratives but as sharing small, relatable anecdotes that connect people and illustrate values in action. These stories help make abstract concepts tangible and inspire others through example. The chapter acknowledges the challenge of navigating difficult or sensitive topics in everyday conversations and provides guidance on approaching these with tact, empathy, and honesty. Leaders are encouraged to address issues promptly rather than avoiding them, using language that is respectful and focused on solutions. Furthermore, the chapter explores how everyday leadership talk can reinforce organizational culture by modeling desired behaviors such as accountability, collaboration, and innovation. Leaders who speak consistently about these values and demonstrate them through their communication set the tone for others to follow. The chapter also highlights the importance of feedback loops in everyday talk, encouraging leaders to solicit input regularly and respond constructively, creating a dynamic of continuous improvement and mutual respect. It discusses how the frequency and quality of everyday conversations contribute to engagement and retention, making communication a strategic priority rather than an afterthought. The chapter considers cultural and individual differences in communication styles, urging leaders to adapt their everyday talk to be inclusive and respectful of diverse perspectives, fostering belonging and equity. In addition, the chapter explores the informal networks and water-cooler conversations that often drive organizational dynamics beneath the surface, advising leaders to be aware of and engage with these channels as opportunities for influence and information gathering. The chapter also examines the impact of digital communication tools on everyday leadership talk, acknowledging both the convenience and challenges they present. Leaders are encouraged to use emails, chats, and virtual meetings thoughtfully, maintaining warmth and clarity despite the lack of face-to-face cues. The chapter concludes by reinforcing that everyday leadership talk is a powerful, cumulative force that shapes how people feel about their work, their leaders, and their organization. By embracing intentional, empathetic, and clear communication in routine interactions, leaders build strong relationships, foster trust, and create environments where people can thrive. Ultimately, the chapter invites leaders to recognize that their words matter every day, and that the most effective leadership communication is woven seamlessly into the fabric of daily life, quietly but powerfully influencing outcomes, culture, and success over time. Conclusion. The conclusion of How to Talk Like a Leader serves as a powerful synthesis and call to action, reiterating that effective leadership communication is not an innate talent reserved for a select few but a vital skill that can be learned, refined, and mastered through conscious effort, self-awareness, and practice, framing the entire book's lessons as accessible tools to elevate one's ability to inspire, influence, and connect in any leadership role. It begins by reminding readers that leadership is fundamentally about human connection, and at its core, communication is the bridge that transforms vision into reality, ideas into action, and individuals into teams and organizations that thrive. The conclusion reinforces the notion that language shapes leadership. How leaders speak influences not only what people hear but how they feel, think, and behave, underscoring the profound responsibility leaders bear to choose their words thoughtfully, speak with clarity and purpose, and embody authenticity and empathy in every interaction. Drawing together the key themes from each chapter, the conclusion highlights that leadership communication is multifaceted, involving mastering the power of leadership language, speaking with clear intent, crafting a compelling leadership voice, leading conversations with presence and empathy, wielding the language of influence ethically, communicating effectively under pressure during crises, and embracing everyday moments as rich opportunities for leadership talk. It stresses that these skills are interdependent and must be practiced holistically, encouraging leaders to continually assess and adapt their communication style to the needs of their audience and context. The conclusion also acknowledges the challenges inherent in leadership communication: the fear of public speaking, the difficulty of managing emotions, the complexity of influencing diverse groups, and offers encouragement that these hurdles are surmountable with patience and persistence. It emphasizes the importance of self-awareness as the foundation for growth, urging leaders to seek feedback, reflect on their communication habits, and remain open to learning and evolving. The conclusion underscores that effective leadership communication requires emotional intelligence, not just the ability to articulate ideas clearly but the capacity to tune into others' emotions, respond with empathy, and build trust through genuine connection. It reiterates that language is a vehicle not only for transmitting information but for inspiring confidence, fostering collaboration, and shaping culture. Moreover, the conclusion highlights the ethical dimension of leadership communication, warning against the temptation to manipulate or coerce and instead calling for honesty, transparency, and respect as guiding principles. Leaders who communicate with integrity build lasting credibility and inspire loyalty, creating environments where people feel valued and motivated. The conclusion further reflects on the role of storytelling as a uniquely human way to make meaning and motivate action, encouraging leaders to continue developing their narrative skills to connect with audiences on intellectual and emotional levels. It also notes that in today's fast-paced and often fragmented communication landscape, leaders must be intentional about presence, showing up fully, listening deeply, and speaking deliberately, to cut through noise and foster genuine engagement. The conclusion acknowledges the transformative power of everyday leadership talk, reinforcing that leadership is woven into the fabric of daily interactions, and that small, consistent acts of communication can cumulatively build influence, trust, and positive culture. It encourages leaders to approach every conversation, whether formal or informal, as an opportunity to lead with clarity, empathy, and authenticity. Furthermore, the conclusion stresses the importance of preparation and adaptability, reminding leaders that no two situations are alike and that flexibility in communication style is essential to meet diverse needs and navigate complexities. It advocates for ongoing learning and skill development, highlighting that communication mastery is a journey, not a destination, requiring curiosity, humility, and resilience. The conclusion also recognizes the impact of technology and changing communication mediums, urging leaders to leverage new tools thoughtfully while maintaining the timeless principles of effective communication: clarity, empathy, and authenticity. Finally, the conclusion issues a motivational challenge to readers to step into their leadership potential by embracing the power of their voice, committing to intentional communication, and viewing every interaction as an opportunity to make a positive difference. It leaves readers with the empowering message that by learning how to talk like a leader, they can inspire others, foster collaboration, and drive meaningful change, ultimately shaping not just organizations but the broader communities and world around them. In essence, the conclusion of How to Talk Like a Leader is both a profound reminder of the critical role of communication in leadership and an inspiring invitation to harness that power with courage, integrity, and heart.